watching this on the live stream at home or viewing it later. This is the last full council of the municipal year, on Wednesday the 20th of April 2022. So item 1 as ever is the evacuation procedure. We are not expecting an emergency, a fire or anything like that, so if the alarm sounds, it is for real. Please remain calm. We will leave by the fire exits that you came through or at the back there. If you need assistance leaving, then please raise your hand and officers will assist you. We will form up over by what is now Virgin Money that was formerly the Yorkshire Bank. As mentioned at the start, this is being live streamed and recorded for future broadcast on YouTube. And if I could ask everybody to remember that as they conduct themselves and people get to their seats. Great, so we can move on to item 2, apologies. I have 2 apologies. First of all, from Councillor Hocking and then Councillor Rudkin. Are there any other apologies? Councillor Condacall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The sergeants, Jane and Andrew, apologised last time they couldn't come, if you remember.
Thank you. Councillor Watkins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Neil Phillips.
Thank you. Okay, if we can now move on to the minutes under item 3. There's 2 sets of minutes for us to approve. First of all, the full council on the 14th of February. There is an amendment on page 7 to include Councillor Hartshorn in the list of attendees. Councillor Condacall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. On page 12, where Councillor Golby responds to my wife's question, it says we've not bought a new property, this is an existing property. Might we have a note to explain we've actually bought existing property, because it can be read 2 different ways, that statement, and we have actually bought the new property, a property new to the council. Thank you.
It's a minute of the proceedings. It's not detail about the transaction, Councillor, so it reflects the proceedings. And the other set of minutes that we need to approve are for the Extraordinary Council on the 16th of March, with the amendment to include that Councillor Condacall left the meeting early. Councillor Beetham.
It's okay. It's Councillor Brown, but in any case, yeah, you've just made the point I was about to make, that the minutes did not record originally that Councillor Condacall left the meeting at one point.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Beetham.
So this is an amendment of the previous one that we just went on. I didn't raise my hand in time, sorry, Mayor. It's just on page 9 of the minutes, so page 15 of the agenda. It says that my question was to the leader of the council when it should have been to finance and corporate. Thank you.
I shall I shall refer to the leader. Bear with me. And in the meantime, I think Councillor Condacall, you indicated.
Yeah, can I ask a procedural point? We've never recorded before when councillors have left a meeting early, and quite often we don't have a full set of councillors at the end of a meeting. So I do feel this is particularly victimising me compared to other councillors. I understand at planning meetings, sometimes you have to record who's there at the vote, but it's never been an issue before to actually record someone's left early.
We should, we do. I've certainly seen it in the minutes a number of times. So there's no distinguishment being made. You left fairly shortly after the start of the meeting, and that's recorded in the minutes. It would be recorded for any of us. So... Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just reading page 15, I think Councillor Beetham's referring to. It was indeed to Councillor Croft and not myself, so if that could be amended, that would be helpful.
Thank you very much. Councillor Beetham, are you content? Great. No other comments? Nobody else wants to raise anything? No, that's great. In that case, then, It is a procedural motion, so we will just take the vote. All those in favour of approving them with the amendments that we've just mentioned? Any against? Just one. Any abstentions? None. So those are approved. Thank you. You want to sign them? Thank you very much. So if we can now move on to agenda item 4, declarations of interest. As stated on page 47 onwards in the agenda, are there any other declarations of interest that aren't already recorded? No. Right, we will take those as read then. So that moves us on to item 5, announcements. I do have one announcement I've been asked to make as Mayor. We've had a request from Freeman of the Borough on Garung. It's an announcement that on the 24th of April at 10:30 a.m. at the Gurkha Memorial, we will be holding the 7th anniversary 7th anniversary of the unveiling of the monument. And it's also the 207th anniversary of the Gurkhas joining the British Army. So, gosh, quite an occasion. So all councillors are invited and are welcome to attend. There will be tea and coffee after at Gurkha Corner. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have 2 announcements to make. Firstly, it is somewhat customary, as we are now in the final council before an election. I don't think any of us in this chamber have forgotten that there is an election going on. But we do have a number of councillors who are standing down. And as I said, it is customary for us to acknowledge the service that those councillors have given to this council, to the borough and their constituents. We do have Councillor Lydia Hocking for Camp Hill. We have Councillor Anne Llewellyn Nash for Heath. We have Councillor Hayden Walmsley for Weddington. Councillor Jane Sargent for Arbury. Councillor Andy Sargent for Attleborough and Councillor Michaela Rudkin for Bede. All of them were elected in 2018, I believe, Mr. Mayor, and this will be their 4th year, or the end of their 4th year in office. I think it is important to note that whilst we are councillors and members of the community and active in our communities, it does actually take a great deal of time for us as individuals in fulfilling the duties that we undertake. And regardless of our politics, we may differ in terms of Labour versus Conservative or otherwise, but I don't think anyone can deny the amount of service that an individual gives to their communities during their term of office, and it is an undertaking that we do. We all take it on gladly, we all volunteer for it. It is often, Mr. Mayor, a thankless task, but also the little victories we get as individual ward councillors can be rewarding in themselves, that we can help someone. So I would like to formally thank those members for their service to this council, the borough and their constituents, and I wish them all the best in their future endeavours.
Thank you, Councillor.
Secondly, Mr. Mayor, my final announcement is we are at the end of the municipal year. It is the first year of this new Conservative administration, and on behalf of myself and my Cabinet colleagues, and indeed I would hope everyone in this chamber, I would like to publicly thank the officers of this authority for all their hard work over the past year. We have been still coming out of the pandemic. It still has its challenges that we all face. And I know that officers are working exceptionally hard to not only assist with the COVID recovery, but putting in place a number of policies which this administration has asked for, and quite rapidly, I must say, after the election, and I do thank them for that. And I would hope that the Chief Executive would pass on our thanks, and it can be noted in the minutes so that all officers can see that their hard work and efforts are appreciated by the elected members of this authority, and I would hope also the public across the wards. And also I do notice, Mr. Mayor, that actually I was looking at one of the community forums, and some residents actually went out and gave our binmans Easter eggs for Easter. And I think that is a mark of the appreciation and thanks that our residents have for these hard-working members of staff. So I hope that Mr Davis will take that on board to the rest of the officers. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I think we would all echo those comments. Can move on to any other announcements? Anyone has? Yep. Councillor Watkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to echo what Councillor Wilson has just said. It is a difficult task being a councillor, as we all know. And as we all know, coming up to an election, we wear some shoes out going around the streets. But we do get some rewards along the way. And hopefully we do well for the people of this borough, which is the main thing. And the officers are always sterling and stand behind us and help us with every decision that we make. So thanks go out to every officer in this council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Right. In that case, we will move on to item 6, public participation. And from the sheet that I have in front of me, the first question is from Mr Sam Margrave, who I don't believe is with us today. So I will ask the Chief Executive to read the question out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Margrave's question is as follows, and it's for the Leader of the Council. Local people, every one of us, is facing a cost of living crisis, meaning electric and gas bills, petrol, and the price of an everyday shopping basket is rising. While the government is overing £150 to each resident, this will hardly make a dent, meaning that they may have to choose between eating and heating. This will only get worse as we all feel repercussions from ongoing geopolitics. What is the Council doing extra, working with others or using its budget beyond and on top of the government's £150 or existing projects to protect and make sure children, the vulnerable and local families aren't going hungry and can meet their bills while we all weather this storm of rising prices, often beyond anything some of us have seen in our lifetime? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As it does fall as it is a financial matter, Councillor Croft will be answering that question.
Yeah, that would be appropriate, Councillor Croft. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. And Mr Margrave is quite right in his question when he says that the cost of living has worsened for many of our people, which is really code for saying that serious inflation is once again affecting our economy. And there is no doubt, and we are acutely aware, that inflation is a terrible burden on our residents, and it affects each and every one of us, particularly the poorest and those on fixed incomes. Inflation reduces purchasing power for food and clothing, increases the cost of heating homes, and makes the daily commute and the school run more expensive. And of course, it robs people of their savings and after they've worked for years to build up an investment for the future. But because Mr Margrave has asked such a high level and a broad question, I feel the first part of my answer must be to manage his expectations. As is implied in the question, inflation and cost of living pressures we face are affected by global and national forces. War in Eastern Europe, global supply chain issues, lack of productivity, the after effects of the COVID crises, and ill-considered green levies are all driving price inflation. The solutions to these problems require action at very least at the national level, and in many cases will be decided far beyond our shores. Set against this, Mr Mayor, this council is a lower tier authority with a very specifically defined set of functions, so it has to be recognised upfront that our scope for action is very limited. This administration has already had to take tough budget choices to reset its medium-term financial plan in the light of the black holes we inherited upon taking office, and we are not immune to these inflationary pressures ourselves. There is very little scope for additional spending on top of the budget that we announced just 2 months ago. So again, I want to make sure that Mr Margrave's expectations are managed to a realistic level. We cannot responsibly promise large-scale programmes of relief to solve cost of living problems with powers or money that we do not possess. Now, having said all that, Mr Mayor, where we can help, we will. In the budget we announced, we've already reduced car parking charges so that a trip to town is far less expensive than it was. We've kept our council tax precept to the lowest sustainable level. We've announced £345,000 for our homelessness reduction funding. And we put £75,000 of the new burdens funding towards a youth employment scheme to help our young people get into work. Our communities team have moved the Citizens Advice Bureau into the Town Hall so that residents can have better access to a wider range of advice and be signposted to those other agencies that are better placed to offer advice. On the housing side, we've received £2.5 million of further government grants to assist with energy efficiency of homes within the borough, both private and council. We are working to make sure that all of our new housing is as close to passive house standards as possible, and we're retrofitting as much of our housing stock as we can within our existing budgets with external insulation and boiler upgrades so that the bills of our tenants are reduced. And we've also offered some extra advice to residents for getting EcoFlex grants to help with their energy efficiency. And of course, Mr. Mayor, with our ongoing council tax support scheme, we have provided a total of £9 million of payments through the financial year that has just gone. And finally, Mr. Mayor, I'm very glad that the question referred to the £150 energy rebate scheme from the government, because it allows me to confirm that we have made the first payment of that grant, totalling £3.45 million to 23,000 of our A to D council taxpayers who paid by direct debit on April the 1st, which should be crediting their accounts from today. So if you haven't got it, let us know. And there's another £250,000 in the discretionary scheme. We'll be processing the payments for those payments that were made in the middle of April shortly. However, to be able to do that, we do need the bank details of our taxpayers. And this is why I want to use the bully pulpit slightly. 25% of our council tax A to D payers don't actually pay by direct debit, which means we don't have your bank details. So I would encourage all taxpayers in this borough to set up a direct debit so that we can actually make this payment to you. So there you are, Mr. Mayor. We do have to be realistic about what we can do as a council, but we are doing quite a lot as it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Croft. Okay, so the next question I've got is from Mrs. Michelle Condacor. I understand that we have a microphone up in the public gallery, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you. It's very disappointing to see the state of the path from the end of Oaston Road to the bridge across the flood relief and onto Horston Grange. Having seen the building of crossing gates completed, I was looking forward to seeing the path improved, but instead it has deteriorated. I checked the situation back in October 2020 when the planning department confirmed that as part of the planning permission, the developer has agreed to hand over a small area of land to the front of the site in order that the current footpath access which crosses over the flood relief channel can be partially widened. Can the portfolio holder for planning explain how we can move this forward with the various stakeholders? Thank you.
So, Councillor Smith, if you'd like to respond.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the question, Mrs. Condacor. This issue is subject of a Section 106 agreement between Warwickshire County Council as the Highways Authority and the developer themselves. As an update, I can confirm that the developer and the Highways Authority are currently finalising details for the delivery of the improvements, and all parties are eager to proceed with the works, which should be agreed shortly. And then they'll be carried out by the developer, and they will be a 2.3 metre footpath, a 0.5 metre border, and the remainder being low-level shrubs.
Thank you very much, Councillor. We can now move on to the third question. That's from Mr. Wormsley, who I believe has the microphone.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Smith should stop blaming innocent parties and should actually be blaming our local MPs, destroying our precious green belt. They are part of the Conservative government that insisted upon a duty to cooperate at the time. Local Conservatives MPs Jones, Biles, Pawsey, as usual, failed the people of Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington. This was from a press article where a local resident appealed to the Conservative Council to hold MPs to account. I guess Councillor Smith's clueless that his Conservative government's NPPF document set out the requirements for reclassification of Greenbelt and the need for councils to maintain delivery of a 5-year supply of housing land. I guess Councillor Smith's clueless that the NPF also identifies the housing targets this council had to achieve. Bulkington MP Pawsey, Nuneaton MP Jones, Bedworth MP Biles all voted in favour of the housing numbers in the NPPF. The recent local Conservative plea to stop big developments while Coventry City Council's housing need is properly assessed was snubbed by the Conservative Secretary of State, who refused to remove the overspill homes due to Localism Act's duty to cooperate. This duty requires councils to consult and engage with neighbouring authorities in the preparation of local plans. Bulkington MP Pawsey, Nuneaton MP Jones, Bedworth MP Biles all voted in favour of the additional 4,020 houses in the Localism Act. Either they did not understand what they were voting for, or they did not care about Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington, or alternatively they were merely puppets doing as they were told. In March 2017, Labour called for the 3 Conservative MPs that represent the residents of this borough to support the council in our fight against imposition of further housing from the Conservative-led councils across Warwickshire. This fell on ignoring Conservative MP ears, probably because that's what they had voted for. In June 2019, the local plan was adopted after acceptance by the Conservative Government Inspector. This Conservative Council since published Borough Plan Review Issues and Options 2021, in which they write that they actually acknowledged their government failings to the people of Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington. At last, NBBC Conservatives accept their government are responsible for the number of houses demanded. At last, NBBC Conservatives accept their government laws force local councils to take additional numbers of houses. At last, NBBC Conservatives accept local councils cannot do anything without a change of law. You local Conservatives promised to submit your shiny new borough plan to the Secretary of State in July 22. That would certainly appear to be yet another Conservative Party lie to the good people of Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington. This Conservative Council either lied to the people or were naive enough to think their laws did not apply to them, Conservative Party theme there, or simply just did not understand. Whichever the reason, it shows a complete lack of ability in every respect. You local Conservatives should accept your failures and apologise to the people of Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington.
Thank you. So the ran over a little bit, but at least you got to finish what you wanted to say. So, Councillor Smith, if you'd like to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wouldn't normally respond to statements, but this one is so far off the mark, it was painful to listen to. Before I go on, I do need to correct Mr. Wormsley. We don't have an MP Biles for Bedworth. I would have thought you would have known that. It is actually Craig Tracy who's MP for Bedworth. I'm assuming Mr. Wormsley's renewed interest in the borough plan has something to do with the fact that his sat-nav has led him to Bulkington, and he's been speaking to residents there. I just hope he remembers to apologise to the good residents of Bulkington on his travels for the irreversible damage his party's borough plan has done to the village and its greenbelt. Hopefully, as I've been a resident of Bulkington for 40 years, mine will be one of the doors he knocks with an apology. Mr. Mayor, this is a typical Labour response so often used when they mess things up, and it follows a very familiar pattern. First of all, Labour takes on a big project. Usually, they make a complete hash of it. They then say it was someone else's fault because they made us do it. Finally, in this case, they admit they've produced a fourth-rate borough plan and blame us for not putting it right quickly enough, which is totally unbelievable. Mr. Wormsley's statement conveniently leaves out all of the really important facts. The borough plan was totally and wholly put together by the now ousted Labour administration, and Labour alone are to blame because no one else was involved in creating that plan. Fact 2, because Labour didn't attend meetings to stand up for the residents of Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington, they found themselves forced to take 4,000 overflow houses from Coventry that decimated much precious greenbelt in Bulkington, in Hawkesbury, in Golf Drive in Whitestone, and the woodlands in Bedworth, to name just a few areas. And by the way, this was the same woodlands that in an election manifesto Labour promised to protect from any sort of development. Labour were the only members to vote to adopt the borough plan, So it's without doubt totally theirs. Not Conservative, not Green, not the Independents, Labour. Having adopted the borough plan, which they labelled as a third rate at the time, but I see they've now relegated it to a fourth rate borough plan, they made a promise to start an immediate review. Guess what? 2 years later, we were still waiting for that review. Within 2 months of taking control last May, this Conservative administration launched a review with a public consultation. We initially set an ambitious target, which unfortunately has been slightly extended due to outside circumstances that are beyond our control. But it will still be delivered within a time frame which, if Labour had done what they promised, would have seen us adopting a new plan about now. On taking control, this Conservative administration withdrew from the Memorandum of Understanding signed by Labour that added 4,000 houses to the plan. This sends a clear message to our partner local authorities that this Conservative administration will be doing things very differently and standing up for the residents of Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington to protect our green belt, not build on it. Apparently, it's now our MPs' fault that Labour produced a fourth-rate borough plan. These are the same MPs that stood side by side with residents to oppose the disastrous plan when it was in the making. And they've lobbied in Parliament to try and achieve a moratorium on major development while the inflated housing numbers in our review were sorted out. Finally, Mr Mayor, I would urge Mr Walmsley to think very carefully before putting pen to paper in an attempt to deflect blame in the future, and consider it in the light of day before pressing that send button. The only thing in his statement I accept is that the borough plan is fourth rate, and it's solely the work of the previous Labour administration. It's down to them and them alone, and this Conservative administration is getting on with the job of putting things right, not just in relation to this plan, but in many areas right across the authority after decades of Labour mismanagement. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Now move to the fourth and final question from the public, which is going to be from Kathleen Price.
Hi. So many residents in Nuneaton and Bedworth have concerns regarding the cost to themselves in council tax for some of the current proposals by the council. One of these proposals is to rename the Rowan Ringway. It is noted that at a cabinet meeting on the 9th of March, the council were asked for the costing of this proposal, which was voted for unanimously. Councillor Chris Wilson stated, "I think it would be nominal in terms of fees and charges. Is the council now able to assure residents of Nuneaton and Bedworth that the renaming of the Rowan Ringway has been fully costed and they're able to divulge to the residents the actual cost and the full legal process to achieve this?"
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I thank Mrs Price for her question. It is interesting to see that the Labour Party are asking questions from the public, yet her Labour Council colleagues here tonight haven't asked a single one on the order paper. Following years of decline in civic pride under the last Labour administration, this new Conservative administration is acting to restore pride in our borough. As we all know, Her Majesty the Queen has achieved an historic milestone, never to be seen in our, or indeed probably future lifetimes again. 70 years on the throne. Imagine that, Mr Mayor. 70 years in one job. And she still believes in her solemn vow to our nation to serve and protect our way of life, just as much now as she did in 1952. To address the costs directly, we will, by law, need to advertise the change by placing an advert in the newspaper. This will cost £169 plus VAT. The actual legal mechanism was in the Cabinet Papers if Mrs Price would like to read that. In addition, we will have to replace 8 road signs. Each sign will cost £60 to purchase and £70 to install. This means the total cost will come to £1,242.80, or thereabouts, with some other officer time possibly. When you consider that we are celebrating the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, 70 years, or, to put it another way, 25,567 days, that equates to just 0.048 pence per day. I think that is worth it to commemorate such a momentous occasion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, that brings us to the end of questions and statements by the public, and we move on to item number 7, which is questions by members. The first one, question 1, is from Councillor Kyle Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I ask the Deputy Leader of the Council to provide us with an update on the provision of changing places toilets in the borough?
Councillor Golby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your question as well. So before I make any comment on this, just to say that I've gone through some of the old papers and some of the old videos to check facts for accuracy before anybody wants to jump out of this seat. So at a full council meeting back in early 2018, I brought up the lack of changing places facilities in our borough as being an issue. Changing places are more than standard disabled toilets. They are accessible toilets which meets the needs of disabled children and adults with complex care needs who require care support, appropriate equipment like hoists or changing platforms, and more space when using the bathroom. Some of our residents are physically unable to use the bathroom unaided or at all, so have special adult changing places facilities to either help with this or to allow them to be changed in a clean and dignified manner. Back at the meeting in 2018, when the suggestion of these facilities was raised, we, the Conservatives, were immediately mocked by the then portfolio holder, ex-councillor Barry Longdon, who said, amongst other things, and again, I did check the video for accuracy, that he thought the fairies had come down and sprinkled us with fairy dust to give the Conservatives a social conscience. Despite the derogatory comments from and being laughed at by several members of the then controlling Labour group, some of which are standing for election at the moment, this Conservative administration were determined that we should bring these facilities to the borough. In 2020, at another council meeting, a scrutiny meeting, I again proposed we take the issue of the lack of facilities to a full council for a further discussion. Despite the suggestion being backed by the Conservatives, every single councillor from the then controlling Labour group at that meeting voted against my proposals. So they were again blocked. Since the first suggestion in 2018, the overarching attitude from the Labour group, when they were in control, was to dismiss changing places proposals rather than find ways to make them happen. Fast forward to 2022. The Conservatives are in charge at the Town Hall. One of the first things we did was to start to investigate ways we could provide these facilities in our borough. We looked at feasibility, deliverability, funding streams, both internal and external, and we applied for available grants. And I'm very pleased to say that on the 24th of March this year, 2022, we received confirmation from the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities that we'd been successful in our grant application. The grant application to support the installation of changing places facilities was accepted and we were awarded £100,000. That means we can install facilities in both Nuneaton and Bedworth. Perhaps, as naming is such a hot topic at the moment, we should call them the fairy dust facilities or the Longdon lavatories. In all seriousness, though, I've said it before, and I'll say it again, not everybody is born with disabilities. We are only one bad accident away from needing these facilities ourselves because of permanent life-changing injuries. Anyone that gets in a car or crosses a street is at risk. So these facilities, to put it very simply, are a lifeline for people with disabilities and families with caring responsibilities. No one should have to be laid down on a public toilet floor to be changed. And that will soon become a thing of the past in our borough, thanks to the hard work done since the Conservatives took over at this town hall. And I would again like to echo what we've said earlier about the effort and time that officers have put in to make things like this a reality. Because this isn't just something that we did for political gain. This is actually for our residents, and it's always been for the residents. Unfortunately, that seems to have been missed up until this point. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Colby. Councillor Evans, you've indicated you've got a supplementary? Yep.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor, and I thank the Deputy Leader for her response. It's great news for this borough, and I understand that one of those toilets in Bedworth may be located in the Miners' Welfare Park, but that's obviously to be confirmed. In light of the recent comments made by the North Warwickshire and Bedworth constituency Labour Party's disability officer on social media, does the Deputy Leader agree that this administration has a far better track record in providing enhanced facilities for disabled people in the borough?
Councillor Golby?
Again, thanks. And yeah, I've seen some of the comments that have been put on social media by this particular individual. And when I challenged him on what he had done as the disability officer with regards to the comments that were made at the time when we proposed these, I was told to prove it, that it happened. Well, it's all in the matter of public record. There are videos out there. If you see, you know, you can go and look for them yourself. So, as I'd mentioned before, there was plenty of opportunities in the last 4 years to bring these plans forward and to install these facilities in our borough. But the ruling Labour group simply did not want to do that. They didn't do it. They made no effort to bring these things forward. And ultimately, it was our disabled residents that lost out, plus their families and their carers. And also, economic. We lost out on an economic level because the purple pound, as it's called, is quite significant. People with disabilities will shop where the facilities are to encourage them to shop. And the purple pound is worth about £270 million, or it was pre-COVID. So we're missing out on that. So again, there's an economic benefit as well as a moral duty to do these sorts of things. So the question does still remain, and it is quite shameful, that what did Labour do to install these facilities? Well, the answer is nothing. Nothing. The Conservative group have done more in 10 months than Labour did in 10 years on this. And so categorically, we do have a better track record on this. And I think considering we've got £100,000 grant money, we can say we've got 100,000 times better a track record on this than the previous Labour administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The next question is from Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. For the last decade, we've had considerable house building in Weddington and St Nicholas wards. One of the many impacts has been on the reduced reliability of the Wednesday waste and recycling collections, which serve this expanding area. The problems have become worse as we've had the impacts of the ongoing pandemic and industrial action by some of Coventry City Council-based recycling lorry drivers. Requests have been made to reconfigure the routes for several years, and in June 2021, that's getting on for a year ago, officers produced plans which showed parts of Weddington being transferred onto the Tuesday route. Can the portfolio holder progress these stalled plans or rapidly provide an alternative relief for residents on the Wednesday collections, some of which have missed 2 recycling collections in a row? Thank you.
Councillor Markham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Councillor Condacor, for the question. Labour's massive development in St Nicholas and Weddington has caused a number of pressures on the east of Nuneaton in terms of services and infrastructure, all of which Labour failed to properly plan for when dumping 6,000 houses in the area. It has been left to this Conservative administration to deal with this Labour's legacy of failure on a number of fronts, and sadly this also includes the waste rounds, and we now are at the absolute limits of our current capacity. In our budget for a better borough that this Conservative Council passed in February, we have faced the challenge head-on and have budgeted for a new collection round, equipment and crew. This is a significant investment by this Conservative Council in the services that our residents desperately need in St Nicholas and Weddington. Unlike Councillor Condacor, we are not carping from the sidelines, we are getting on with the job of building a better borough for all. Labour and the Greens failed to support this extra investment in our services. This will all tie in with the reconfiguration work for waste and recycling collections that we are currently undertaking. We are now working with amended route schedules and maps which account for the new builds, including project schemes within the Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council area, and we are currently testing the routes to ensure they are achievable. Once we are satisfied with this, communications will commence to inform residents of changes and prepare amended information accordingly. We are therefore looking for amended routes to commence later this year.
Thank you, Councillor Markham. Yes, Councillor Condacott.
Thank you for your answer, but it's very similar to the answers I got a year ago when Labour ran the council. We clearly understand that there is a problem with the length of routes, and we have built almost all our houses. About 85% of the new houses have gone into Wellington and St Nicholas. So as a temporary measure, I would like a bit of that area to be collected on the Tuesday round. That would at least balance things out before you got the long-term solution. Your officers keep giving us the same thing. It'll be in 6 months. It'll be in 3 months. We need some relief now. And if you cannot fix this, can you give residents £10 a collection back for each time you miss? Because Wellington and St Nicholas residents pay an awful lot in green bin charges, and they're getting the worst service in the borough.
Councillor Markham.
Yeah, well, just in response, why is it that you actually voted against us for the budget when we applied for the extra bin round?
Excuse me, public gallery, please. It's not appropriate. Councillor Condacott, you've asked the question and had a supplementary as well, and you've had your answers. Thank you. So if we can move on to question 3, which is Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Earlier this year, the new Conservative administration listened to the concerns of residents across Nuneaton and Bedworth, including those of my residents in St Nicholas, about the nuisance sale of cars by the side of the highway, and actually introduced a public space protection order to combat this activity, which I welcomed. Could the portfolio holder for planning and regulation give an update on where we are with the introduction of the PSPO, please, and what actions are being taken? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Clark, for the question. These public space protection orders are important tools that enable us to effectively enforce to protect our public spaces and stop them being spoilt for the money by what's probably just a few individuals. I'm very happy to let Councillor Clark and the many residents who raised this issue know that the public space protection order covering commercial car sales on the public highway is now fully in force. 7-day notices were immediately served on all vehicles that were in contravention of the order on the day it came into force, and I'm very pleased to report that on the final day of notice, all the vehicles identified were removed from the highway. And so far, there have been no further breaches of the order. Signage is now in place at the known locations to make commercial traders aware if they present cars for sale on the side of the highway, we will use our powers to enforce the order, and they could be liable for fines of up to £1,000 per enforcement. I would add a note that tonight a member has raised with me that they've seen a car appear in Bedworth. So I'd ask all members, if you see a car for sale on the side of the highway, take a snapshot, report it as a member on the portal, and we will get straight on to enforcing it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. I think we could also extend that to the public. Anybody watching or reading about this, please do report it straight away. We put the PSPO in for a reason. It's being enforced vigorously, and it will continue to be. And the feedback that we've had so far is very good. So please do report it. It will make a difference. Thank you. If we can now move on to the final question, question 4 from Councillor Brett Beetham.
Thank you, Chair. So, as a portfolio holder for Health and Environment, I know you're aware of residents and myself asking for new equipment in Stockingford Rec. Can you please let residents of Kingswood know when the new play equipment in Stockingford Rec is due to be installed, and what the council are going to do to make sure the parks, which under Labour's previous administration haven't gotten any new equipment in years, are brought up to standard and maintained?
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Guttridge.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Beetham, for the question. In the emergency budget passed by this council in June, following this Conservative administration taking office, we passed plans for new play equipment to be installed in Bolkington, Kersley and Stockingford. These projects were funded by money that should have been spent years ago on better services for our local people and children. But the last Labour administration squirreled away and failed to use for local need as the new... But the last Labour administration squirreled away and failed to use the money. As for the new portfolio holder, I found that this was shameful and was glad that we could right the wrong left to us by Labour. Following the passage of the emergency budget, I am delighted to advise you that the additional play equipment recently discussed will be fitted in Stockingford Recreation Ground week commencing the 2nd of May, subject to weather conditions. It should be completed within that week, but I will keep you informed of progress. When I became the portfolio holder for health and environment, I was dismayed to find the lack of strategy and direction in the department left by the last Labour administration. I have spent a lot of time working with officers to start putting some structure into the department. To this end, we have recently appointed consultants to assist the Parks and Green Space team with the development of a new overarching green space strategy, alongside the new tree and biodiversity recovery strategies and refresh play and allotment strategies. These will provide a clear direction for all our parks and green spaces and the facilities for the next decade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Guttridge. So that... Councillor Watkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Beetham, for your strange question. What you seem to forget is that Stockingford Rec actually had the first concrete skate park in the borough. I'm just going to ask a question to the portfolio holder. I'm just put a supplementary question to the portfolio holder. Well, is that it? Okay.
We do allow supplementary questions, but it has to be from the question asker. Sorry. To pick back up, that concludes agenda item 7, questions by members. We're now moving on to agenda item 8, special urgency. There have been 2 special urgency decisions taken since the last council meeting, and they are listed in the main agenda, page 4, noting. So, do we pass a vote on that? Yeah, no. Yeah, it's just for noting. So, Councillor Condicle.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I must ask why on earth the boundary review was special urgency. This has been coming up for years and we knew it was happening. So why is it a special urgency decision and not one actually planned? We always moaned at the last administration that so much came in through not calling special urgency. And then we have this boundary review stuff that is rushed in through special urgency. So maybe the leader could explain that. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Not for the first time, Councillor Condicle completely gets his facts wrong. We have known as a council that we are overdue for a boundary review, with the last boundary review being in 1999. We were only served notice by the Local Government Boundary Commission, I think it was November, December time, that this was coming forwards. So we had to move quickly to act, given the Local Government Boundary Commission's deadlines that we had to see through. So it was taken forward as a special urgency decision because we weren't able to forecast the actual notification coming through. This administration got on with the job of ensuring that we can begin the work of engaging in the boundary review process. So I fail to see why Councillor Condacor cannot simply follow the facts and actually get his suppositions right. Not for the first time, he gets things completely back to front.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. If we can move on to agenda item 9, which is the Cabinet report. If we can remember, this is just questions only. Are there any questions? Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a few questions. I'll take them one at a time. I think this is probably for the council leader. In terms of the quarterly review of performance, which was the bottom of page 3, we had a £372,000 shortfall on our commercial property renting. This will be things like the co-op shop and businesses, etc. Can the council leader explain this? Because we had the issue, we bought this Woolworths many years ago recklessly. We rented it out for £1 for a while. We've now converted it at some great cost, and it's now sitting empty. And we obviously have got a lot of other empty properties if we're losing £372,000 in the third quarter outturn. Thank you.
Thank you. On a procedural item, I should have asked Councillor Wilson to move that first, but so if you wouldn't mind doing that, Councillor.
Of course, Mr. Mayor, I will retrospectively move the report.
Thank you.
And I am happy to answer any questions, and so are my cabinet. To answer Councillor Condacor's range of questions directly, I suppose he never uses a fact where a conspiracy will serve his narrative better. For a start, £370,000 shortfall in commercial property. No one is denying that, but unless he's been hibernating for the past 2 years, he might have forgotten there's been a thing called COVID. And that has significantly impacted businesses up and down the country, and Nuneaton and Bedworth has not been immune to the impacts of the COVID pandemic. It has meant that we have seen a fall in what we would have originally budgeted for in terms of commercial receipts. We are working where we can with individual companies and owners to recover some of that money once they see an improvement in their situation. So we haven't forgotten about any rent which is owed to us, but for commercial reasons, to ensure that the businesses can continue to survive, and therefore residents of Nuneaton and Bedworth continue to have jobs to actually pay the bills and feed their families, we have agreed in some circumstances to defer some payments, and there are some situations where we are in the middle of recouping that back. Of course, that is commercially sensitive, and I cannot go into those details at this stage. In terms of the Woolworths site itself, yes, TJ Hughes didn't work out, but actually having that site, the old Woolworths, is working in our favour. We know that as part of the wider regeneration of Nuneaton Town Centre, some businesses are going to have to be displaced, and that provides an ideal site for a potential business to move into. Some people can probably guess which site we are talking about, but I'm not actually able to divulge that, although I think Claire Harrison has probably named it in several of her news stories over the years. We have interest in the second floor, or well, the first floor actually, you've got ground then first, with a local organisation wanting to go in there, which will actually generate us an income, which we didn't have before. And indeed, there is interest in the second floor as well. So rather than being a complete disaster in buying the old Woolworths, we actually owned the land, we just didn't own the building. And I remember sitting where Councillor Condacor is now, in my maiden speech in 2010, supporting the purchase of that property, and it is starting to bear fruit. Yes, there have been issues along the way. When we purchased the property in 2010, no one could have foreseen the impacts of the last recession that we had from Labour. We are now seeing the impacts of the COVID recession, and that will have to work its way through. But yet again, we have the typical traditional scaremongering tactics of the Green Party, when actually it is this administration getting on with the job of fixing this broken borough we inherited from his watermelon friends, the Labour Party.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Condacor, you've got another question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is probably also for the council leader. In the report on the combined authority, it talks about all these super-duper EV chargers, and it explicitly says they're not for outside in the non-constituent areas. can the leader actually say, are we getting any EV chargers in the near term? Because I know a lot of the regeneration will take a few years before we get to that stage.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We are a non-constituent member of the Combined Authority, and that does mean there are certain restraints on what we can or cannot apply for. He may remember that we actually got, I think it's close to £800,000 in terms of land remediation for the Abbey Street site. So we can actually access funds, and my officers in my portfolio are actively seeking opportunities to apply for other funds from the Combined Authority. And I must actually apologise to Council that I said that Laura Schoaf was visiting last time. Unfortunately, we had a storm Eunice, I think it was at the time, so she was delayed, but she's actually visiting this Friday, and I am looking forward to showing her the delights of Nuneaton Town Centre and showing her the opportunities in Bedworth. In relation to the EV chargers, if he paid attention to some of the detail around transforming Nuneaton, he would know that part of what we actually bid for from the Towns Fund, yes, it was the Towns Fund, we actually have some electric charging points coming into the town centre as a part of that funding from central government, and that will follow in due course.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Watkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Are we going to go through each one, or do you just want everything all at once? Because the rough sleeping, yeah, I'd like to.
Are they all to the same portfolio holder or different ones?
They'll be different.
If you could ask them separately, please. Thank you.
Okay then. The rough sleeping, yeah, fully support that. It's good to see that the Conservative council are going along and doing this rough sleeper idea. So we're in full support of that. It's good to see that things are coming forward on that. The art board's going to be somebody different, but again, in full support of that. But leisure will be somebody else, and then there's other things. So I don't know how you want to do it.
This is questions only, so
Okay.
I think they appreciate your comments and sentiments.
Okay, questions, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll go on the other items then. The renaming of the Rowan Ringway to commemorate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Recently, in the Nuneaton News, the leader of the council said, Councillor Chris Wilson said, "We noticed this development is going to be a big hit, helping withdraw visitors to the town in new ways. We would like to receive as many helpful suggestions as possible at this stage. And what better way to make sure we reach as many people as we can by featuring our appeal in a Nuneaton Memories Facebook group. This is for the development of the old co-op. I'd like to put forward to Councillor Wilson and the Conservative administration that we name it Platinum Plaza in honour of our Queen. A place where people can come, enjoy themselves, meet.
Yes,
This is a
Councillor
question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is questions on the actual Cabinet report. There has been no such Cabinet agenda item on the naming of the Abbey Street development. Whilst I'm happy to engage in witty repartee with the Leader of the Opposition about what we should name the Abbey Street regeneration, it's not on the papers, and this isn't about moving motions about what we do or do not name the building. If he wanted to, he could have contributed to the public consultation, which ran earlier last month, it is now.
Quite so, Councillor Wilson. Yeah, you do need to ask a question directly
Mr.
about
Mayor,
the
I
Cabinet
get that.
report.
It's why I ran through things with you, asked you how you would like to take this.
Questions,
The question
each one,
is
yeah.
on the renaming of the Rowan Ringway. Rather than renaming the Rowan Ringway, Jubilee Way or whatever it is that the council leader wants to do, could we not name something else that would be much better suited to our Queen? Rather than naming a congested old ringway and breaking our ties with Rowan in France, especially at a time of war in Ukraine. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I fail to see how maintaining our ties with Rowan in France will in any way ease the diplomatic and war situation in Ukraine. Perhaps he could enlighten me on how that actually would affect the situation in Kiev. But he had his opportunity to put forward suggestions, both at Cabinet, on whether in actually being there as leader of the opposition to suggest an alternative name. He didn't. And also, whilst they were all anonymised, the responses we had through Nuneaton Memories, he had his opportunity to put them forward through that. That will go through due process. And after we are through the Purdah situation and after the election, we'll be able to announce the actual name of the new Abbey Street regeneration zone. But that doesn't actually relate to the agenda item being considered.
I think the point's well made and well taken. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Watkins, did you have another question at all? Or, then can I move to Councillor Condacor?
Thank you. My final question, and this is actually a genuine question, so please don't attack me for setting you up, is this trailblazing devolution deal mentioned on the West Midlands Combined Authority, does that include transport projects, both potentially the Bay Platform in Coventry and ones like Stockingford Station? Because these rail projects would be trailblazing for Nuneaton and our residents. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Wilson, do you want to answer that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. In response to the question, we are not a constituent member of the Combined Authority. Transport is expressly reserved to the constituent members of the constituent authority. Anything we may benefit from would be tangential in effect. However, any transport issues should be directed through the proper authority for Nuneaton and Bedworth, which is Warwickshire County Council. There are ongoing discussions about the implications of a levelling up white paper and the potential for a county deal. It is too early to say what any of that may look like, but that would probably be the appropriate forum to look at any transport initiatives rather than the Combined Authority, because we are not a constituent member of the WMCA.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, I think that's the end of questions on the Cabinet report. It's been moved, and so we will, and I've seconded from the chair, so we will just move to the vote. Show of hands, please. In favour? And any against? 1. Any abstentions? 3. So that's passed. That's okay. Moving on to agenda item 10, timetable of meetings. Councillor Wilson, you want to move the recommendations as noted on page 57?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will move them with a slight amendment. It is a typographical error. I would draw members' attention to pages 63 and 64 of the agenda. It does say for the next council year, 22-23, that the annual council will fall on Wednesday, the 17th of May. When you then look at the top of page 64, it then says that the annual council for 23-24 is on Wednesday, the 18th of May. They are indeed actually one and the same date, and that should be the 17th of May. So, subject to amending page 64 to say Wednesday, the 17th of May for the annual council, I will move the recommendations, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. We've noted that. And a seconder, please. Councillor Croft. Councillor Condacor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm really pleased the planning meetings are now down for 5:30, because we've had lots of times when we've arrived at 5 o'clock for a confidential item, and then it's only been 10 minutes, and then we've had to hang around. So I thank the Chair Planning for making that adjustment. One thing I would like to adjust, and actually will pose as an amendment if someone will second me, is that we don't have planning application meetings after a bank holiday. I think on these programmes we've only got them after the August bank holiday, but you can never get to talk to a planning officer before a planning meeting if it's the day after a bank holiday. And the August bank holiday has a planning meeting on the Tuesday after. and we have a long gap over Christmas of planning meetings. So my proposed amendment is to slide all the Tuesdays down 1 week. So actually, we actually still keep the same number of planning meetings, but we just don't have one on the will be the 30th of August, after the 29th of August being the bank holiday. I don't know if that finds a seconder or not, but I will mention it after the August bank holiday when it happens, when we have a planning meeting on the Tuesday, if that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Watkins? So we've got a seconder. Any member? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm afraid that Councillor Condacor may end up suffering from the law of unintended consequences on this one, because is he aware of how much effort actually goes into? I mean, poor Kelly over there has been probably tearing her hair out trying to organise the schedule of meetings for 22, 23, get my years right. And it may end up causing additional conflicts or problems with other scheduled meetings which are in the agenda, or may not actually be formal committee meetings of the council, but are meetings that other, particularly cabinet members, actually may have to attend. But also, we do have targets to try and achieve. We do have to determine planning applications in a reasonable time frame, and there are statutory targets for that as well. And I would not want to fall foul of potentially having any applications go to the inspector by virtue of non-determination, because we are, to a large part, dependent upon applicants agreeing, using their goodwill, to agree an extension to the timeline for dealing with planning applications. So he had an opportunity to consult upon this. It was sent out to all groups before it actually came here to full council. No comments that I'm aware of were received. None were sent to me in any event, so I would not agree to the timetable. And if there is no business for the meeting after the bank holiday, I'm sure the chair would cancel the committee in any event, because there's no point sitting if there isn't anything to decide upon.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hartzell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick spot on the timetable. Councillor Condacor, there would still be bank holiday preceding planning application if we were to move them all down a week. The 29th of May is a bank holiday. If you shuffle it down a week, then it would be... Yeah, but if we were to move it down, then it would still incur that bank holiday.
Thank you, Councillor. Well spotted. I'm just a little bit lost, because rather than wait till after a bank holiday, wouldn't you just ask the officers before? But there you go. It's been moved and seconded. Councillor Croft, you reserved your right to speak? No. Councillor Wilson? I think we'll just move to the vote. All those in favour? No. This is the amendment. This is all those in favour of the amendment proposed by Councillor Condacor? So there's one. All those against? Any abstentions? One abstention. So that's a lost. If we can, if there's no other members, we will just move to the vote then on the substantive motion, which is to accept the meeting dates as published. All those... Subject to the amendment that Councillor Wilson described. Do you want to just confirm that? It's just a change of the date from Wednesday, isn't it?
It's just to confirm that the annual council for 2023 will be Wednesday the 17th of May.
I think we've all noted that. If everybody is content, then we will move to the vote, and all those in favour of the substantive motion. Any against? One. Any abstentions? None. So that's carried. Thank you. Concludes item 10. If we can move on to item 11, the annual OSP reports. Normally, chairs of the OSPs move these. This is the first one for the new chairs. So, Councillor Baxter-Payne, if I can ask you to present this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to move these reports on behalf of my fellow chairs, and in doing so I'm sure they'll join me in thanking the officers for the hard work that goes on behind the scenes to put these meetings together, and for all the help they've given to us this year in helping us get through the year.
Thank you, Councillor. And a seconder, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm more than happy to second the recommendation from Councillor Baxter Payne. And like him, I'd like to pay tribute to the diligent work of committee services, officers and directors. They've given so much support to make sure this happened, and also to pay tribute to members from across the chamber who've contributed diligently to making sure the work of the panels was completed in a positive manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few things I'd like to raise as points. Firstly, I had the opportunity to be on one of these committees and serve as a substitute on the other two. And it is really valuable stuff we do on scrutiny meetings. I think as a council, we're less political on scrutiny and more talk about the subjects, be it bus stops or trees or whatever. But there are obviously a few things I need to raise. One from the Finance and Public Services is the Civic Hall Performance Report. The annual report really says very little about it. It says update on Bedworth Civic Hall. The future of the Bedworth Civic Hall is obviously open to some uncertainty. And I do think we should have done a better bit of work on the Civic Hall so that we actually know what's going to happen before we ask people to vote on it in 2 weeks' time. The Civic Hall has been a basket case financially. It obviously needs some reform, and I think it's something the scrutiny should have done something about. The second thing I wanted to mention was bus services, which I think was a question that Councillor Evans raised originally at one of the meetings, and we actually asked it to go to a scrutiny committee. This is really important that we ask questions to go to scrutiny committees because they're things that have relevance to lots of wards. And I know we've lost some bus shelters on the long Hinkley Road, for example, which affected my ward. It says in this report that a letter was received from Warwickshire County Council, but we haven't had sight of that. So it would be useful if the chairs actually sort of ticked off and sort of sent all members maybe a copy of that letter. And just finally, we had the issue of trees, which I raised, and that is something that's been carried over because we haven't yet had I put in a work suggestion form about our tree strategy. I'm really passionate that we actually plant more trees and stop this continuous loss of trees. Each year, we chop down 3 trees for every one we plant. So it's on the work programme now, I believe, and I think it's useful to have these things really as a work to be done list. Likewise, I think one of the other committees is looking at the fire safety audits. So all this stuff we haven't done, I don't want it lost. So I think these reports should have done better on recording the stuff we haven't yet finished. Thank you, Chair.
So a couple of speakers. First of all, Councillor Martin Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All I'd like to do is endorse the statements made by my fellow OSP chairman. Thank you very much indeed for the work of the officers of the borough, but also any comments and issues raised by our members of the committees. Much appreciated, and as said before, the work of the OSP is very important to the business of the borough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kyle Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm not in any way trying to speak on behalf of the chairman of the Finance and Public Services OSP about the Civic Hall performance report, but as members will know, when scrutiny reports go to the relevant committee, they're often sort of signed off by the cabinet member before they go to committee, and I was the cabinet member at the time who signed off those Civic Hall performance reports. The reason there's nothing in the reports is because for the last 2 years we've gone through coronavirus, so we haven't had shows, we haven't been able to open the bar, so there is no data to present to the committee on visits, etc., because it hasn't been operating as an entertainment facility. We get this day in, day out from Councillor Kondaka, and it's not frustrating me, it's actually upsetting NHS employees and volunteers on the ground. Councillor Kondaka, there is no uncertainty whatsoever about the Civic Hall. It is being used as a vaccination facility. I know that you've got track record on peddling lies, smears and untruths about the vaccination efforts locally, but it is being used as a vaccination facility. End of. And when the NHS turn around to us and say, we don't want to use the Civic Hall as a vaccination facility, that's what's going to happen. There is no uncertainty about the Civic Hall. So please, can I just ask you to stop it? Because I understand what you're trying to do. This is a political chamber, but when, as a councillor, you get phone calls from NHS volunteers calling you up to say they're upset about the fact that they're worried that they're going to be kicked out of the Civic Hall because Councillor Kandaka is peddling lies on Facebook, it's just not on. So please, can you just stop it?
Thank you, Councillor. I think Councillor Brown, you indicated.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just return to a couple of points that was made by Councillor Kandaka. The Civic Hall performance report was just that, a report on the performance of the Civic Hall, not a report speculating into the future of the Civic Hall. That's why the points that you've tried to make were not addressed in that report, because it simply covered what had been done, not what you might like to talk about in the future by way of speculation. And as far as the bus stops issue went, a letter was received from the portfolio holder at Warwickshire County Council, and that was copied to the members of the panel.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'm also not sure about the comment about trees either. We plant rather more than that. And just for the record, Hinkley Road's actually not in your ward. But there you go. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm not actually a member of scrutiny. I'm actually one of those who gets scrutinised now. And one of the things I would say is that I think it's been a useful innovation of this new Conservative administration about having portfolio holders actually go and attend and be questioned by members of the committee, whether they be my own members or indeed opposition members. And indeed, whilst I believe some Labour members dislike this innovation, especially when we stay and actually answer questions on the reports themselves, I have to say, I'm sorry, get with the times. This is called scrutiny, not what you did and got away with saying nothing and not being scrutinised. This administration believes in actually answering to all backbenchers on this regard. But what I would say in respect of Councillor Kondakor's comments are, even though it wasn't the Finance and Public Services Committee, he questioned me at the Business and Regeneration Committee about the Civic Hall. It wasn't strictly speaking within that committee's remit, but I answered all of his questions about the Civic Hall. I was there, open and honest about what was going on, but despite that, he has peddled lies on social media and half-truths. Yeah. He said on his social media about how there was, and I think he FOI'd this, Mr. Mayor, that there was an email from the council to the NHS in December, I believe the email was, which he has heavily redacted to lead members of the public to his own innuendo, that somehow there is a conspiracy that we were trying to push the NHS to take it for the year. It is absolute cobblers, Mr. Mayor. What we did was, we said, we have to prepare for our budget. It's December, the budget is due in February. What do you want to do? Give us an answer. That is purely and simply everything that happened. And yet Councillor Kondakor deliberately misleads and lies to residents across this borough about what is going on. He questioned me at OSP, and I gave him an answer that it was the NHS who have asked for it. If they'd have asked me for 3 months, I would have granted it. If they'd have asked me for 3 weeks, I would have granted it. But they asked for 12 months. And I put the residents of this borough's health first and foremost above anything else. I know that the vaccine saved me. I know it has saved others. And that is what we will do until we are through this crisis. But overview and scrutiny should be used to actually question those in authority, not to actually go out and lie to residents of the public.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kondakor.
I'm repeatedly in this chamber accused of lying, so I'd like a point of personal explanation. Or am
Point
I
of
not
order,
allowed?
Councillor Evans.
On a point of order, Mr Mayor, the Constitution states very clearly that a member can only speak once on an item, and Councillor Kundaka has already spoke on this item.
He has indeed, and that's what I was hoping you were going to do, but you went on to ask a question. So do you have a point of personal explanation? It does need to be specifically about what you've said here.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Point of personal explanation. When talking about the agenda item, I expressed my disappointment at the future of the Civic Hall not being discussed, because I think it's important that people know the future before the election. Thank you.
I think we've just heard it, but okay. I think that concludes it. Unless any other member wishes to speak, we will move to the vote. It's been proposed and seconded. All those in favour? Any against? Just one. No abstentions. Thank you very much. Okay, we move on to item 12A, Mayoral Protocol. That's going to be presented by Councillor Kenner.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to propose the recommendation set out in agenda item 12.A as it brings the Mayoral Protocol in line with the Conservative Council's current budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kenner. And a seconder, Councillor Lee Downs.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, I feel that it's important that we vote for this, purely because you, as the Mayor, for this last municipal year, just look around you. You're actually the representator of Her Majesty the Queen. Yeah. We've now got the Union flag flying in the chamber. Thank you very much. We've now got 2 portraits of Her Majesty the Queen in the chamber. Also with what you've done with the mayoral parlour. So, yeah, I'll be proud to second this motion, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any member? Councillor Condacall.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Obviously, I always have lots of questions about mayoralty, and it's really good that the mayoralty costs us a lot less than it used to. It used to be a phenomenally expensive business, the mayoralty. We had the car, we had all sorts of trinkets. We used to get given them occasionally, mayor's pens and mayor's this and mayor's that. All this junk you get from China. So I'm really glad the budget for the mayor has gone down to about, I think it's 32,000. And I think it's important there's actually transparency on that. And I think you were slightly over budget, and there was comments made that actually we will be on budget when various things are then put back into the right categories. So I think it would be good as part of the protocol to actually have an end of year sort of little, like any club or anything does, actually what the mayoralty expenses are. Because say during the year, there's various events that went on, which when we questioned the overspend on the mayoralty, they said that would disappear because the things would be vied across. Yeah, there might have been town centre events. So I think that's something we need to get right. And then there's a civic dinner. We've all been invited to the civic dinner to pay and contribute to Mary Handev's hospice. It'd be useful to get some clarity now how we're organising these civic dinners to raise money for charity, so we know what the council's contributing, etc. And finally, thank you for your Christmas card, but I don't really need to go on the Christmas card list if you could take me off for next year. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Mr Mayor, in regards to the mayoral protocol, it is simply a policy on how the mayoralty functions, operates, what you can do, what you can't do, etc. The actual spend of the mayoralty is more appropriate for the Audit and Standards Committee to consider. As Councillor Condacall is well aware, and he has challenged on numerous occasions, we do have an audit of the council every year by law, and if he wishes to look at any of those, then he is free to do so. But I don't see why we need to include it in the mayoral protocol. We already have an existing policy to deal with how the money is spent. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Quite so, Councillor. I would like just to clarify for people at home, if you have looked at the agenda online, why there's nothing about the budget in there. It's because it's nothing to do with the budget. It was just about the protocol and what mayors should and shouldn't do and restrictions on them. The budget is published and doesn't need coming out at the end of the year, we publish the budget for the council. Our accounts are fully open, and I'm sure the questioner knew that. If there's no other... Oh, Councillor Evans, you wanted to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can just sort of foresee one of the social media posts in the next few hours from Councillor Kandaka on Twitter. So let me just clarify, the Civic dinner, for those watching at home, councillors and members of the public are paying. It's not a freebie. It's all going to charity, because I know what Councillor Kandaka is going to say, but it's not. It's being paid for by councillors.
And it's arranged by the Mayor and not the council. So just to make that distinction, it's private business technically. So right, no other speakers. It's been moved and seconded. So we will move to the vote. All those in favour? Actually, that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. So we are on to item 12B, the Code of Conduct. Again, Councillor Jack Kenner, if you'd like to present that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to propose the changes to the Code of Conduct as set on agenda item 12B. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a seconder? Councillor Brett Beetham.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to reserve my right.
Thank you, Councillor. Any member? Nope. Right, in that case, I think we will move to the vote. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Just one. So that is again carried. Moving on to agenda item 12C, the E-Petition scheme. Councillor Jack Kenner, if you'd like to present that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I lose my breath at this rate in the warmth today. I'd like to propose the recommendations as set on agenda item 12.C for the petition scheme, as it brings the council's petition scheme into the 21st century and it makes it easier for residents to petition the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that would everybody would very much welcome that, making it much easier for residents to put petitions in. E-petitions has got to be the way forward. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Lee Downs.
Yeah, I'll second this motion, Mr. Mayor, and reserve the right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any member? Councillor Condacor.
Thank you. I remember when we had the Localism Act and Councillor Margreave was Chair of Standards many, many years ago, and e-petitions came up and this council didn't implement them. So I'm really, really pleased we're going to have e-petitions. And I do hope when we have petitions to review the housing targets in the borough plan or whatever else the residents want to ask of the council, they're actually treated favourably and not happens like old petitions where we go through this big process, you have a debate, but nothing actually happens. So I really look forward to e-petitions because I've got lots of things I want to petition on. Lots of things we need to sort out, in particular about the environment. I think we need a petition to put some solar panels on some of our buildings, particularly the new hotel and things. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I really welcome the residents having a say in how this council manages things.
Councillor Beetham.
Brilliant, thank you, Mayor. So I'm glad to support this and hope it has support across the board, because not only does it grant e-petitions for first time in this council, but it also lowers the rate of signatures needed so the petitions can be seen, acted upon and debated if needed. Thank you.
Councillor Lubsavakovic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Also, again, I would like to add my thanks and support to this as well tonight. As somebody who's actually organised a petition of 6,500 signatures opposing the borough plan, which was put in by Labour, I know how difficult it is on those cold winter nights when you're having to try and knock doors to get signatures. And this is something which is going to open up democracy in a huge way. And this sort of side of the chamber certainly is not averse to that. We welcome the fact that we want to bring residents in, we want to get them involved. And that's something that unfortunately has been lacking for far too long in this council. So I'm all in favour of this tonight.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm also someone who's organised a petition in my time, 2012, 2013, I think it was, with the borough plan and the proposed Golf Drive Relief Road. So I share Councillor Kovetkovic's pain on that one. I would actually challenge something that Councillor Condacor has said. This authority will not look on every petition favourably, it will look on every petition fairly. And I think that is an important distinction, because knowing some of the items which Councillor Condacor may potentially raise, he could possibly propose putting solar panels all across, I don't know, a field out in St Nicholas. It may not even be financially viable, or it may not be legally doable. But at least we can have a fair, frank and free debate in this chamber, which I think everyone is up for, certainly on this side of the chamber, which is something that we didn't have under the previous administration. It was just brushed under the carpet. We cannot promise to grant every single petition. That would just be madness and delusion. But we can promise that certainly under this administration, we will look on every petition fairly.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be supporting this as somebody who has received petitions from residents in recent months. I fully appreciate the amount of effort that residents have to go through to get signatures on paper petitions under the current system. So that the lady in Kersley had got 500 signatures for new play equipment, that takes some doing, is to go around house to house. The 80-year-old lady in Smarts Road that had got 250 signatures against a housing development. For somebody at that age to be going around asking people to sign, there's got to be a better way, and this is it. So we want to move forward. It should have been done years ago, quite frankly, but now we're putting it in place. Just remember that we're putting it in place.
Thank you, Councillor. If there's no one else, then we will move to the vote. All those in favour of the E-Petitions motion as printed? And that is again unanimous, and that's very welcome to see. Thank you. Now move on to agenda item 12D, the complaints procedure. Councillor Kenner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to recommend the proposals as set on agenda item 12D on the complaints procedure, as it ushers in a fairer system which provides more opportunity for more bloodless resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconder, Councillor Hartshorn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to second this, this, reserve my right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor. Any member? Councillor Condacor.
Thank you. I'm a bit of an expert on complaints and complaints procedures, having for many years suffered complaints under the previous administration, and complaints waste an awful lot of time. So I think it would be great if we didn't have many more complaints and only use the system when something serious has gone wrong. I think one thing would be useful is if people didn't call each other liars continuously when they weren't given the right to reply, and people treated each other with respect. And I think maybe some of the things in Parliament where people are actually expected to use parliamentary language and be nice and all this right honourable stuff, it may be a pain, but it does actually calm down the temper. So I do hope we don't need to use complaint procedure very much. I've got a couple of technical things I'd like to do. One, I think the filtering panel should be 5 members rather than 3. I think a very small panel can be influenced too much by one person. And there's also the issue of people who don't have standing. A lot of time can be wasted where people, even anonymously or don't live in the borough, can put a complaint in about members. So I think people do actually, if they're putting a complaint in, need to say why the councillor they're complaining about has in some way harmed them, or why they've got standing. Because otherwise, I could complain about people in Surrey Council. I can complain about councillors all over the country if there's not an issue of standing. So most legal processes, people who put a complaint in have to have some connection and some standing. And I think that would reduce some of the spurious complaints as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Beetham.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I could be wrong, and I'd be pleased to be corrected, but I don't believe anonymous complaints tend to get put forward as per the complaints procedure that I've seen in the Written Standards.
Quite so. Councillor Golby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think you've got an absolute cheek standing up and saying this. You know why. I know why. It will come out in the end. Guarantee that. But I think you've got an absolute cheek to stand here with some of the stuff that you post on social media about people. You referred to this group as becoming more like Nazis because we wanted to win elections. That's what we do. That's what everybody in this room is doing. That's what people up there are doing. Are they all Nazis as well, or are you just reserving that for this side of the chamber? Good question, wouldn't you think? Now, you don't suffer complaints if the complaints are genuine. People who do complain are the ones who have suffered, and I know that from a personal point of view. Again, not something that I can discuss at the moment, but it will come out in the end because good news like that always does. You know who I'm talking about, and I know who I'm talking about, and they really did suffer. So again, I will reiterate the fact, you have got an absolute cheek. You've got no room to lecture anybody, so you tone down your rhetoric. Last week, you were telling people on your social media that people are leaving this authority because the Conservatives are not providing a nice place for them to work. How are we expected to employ people when you're spouting that tripe? And it is tripe as well, because again, things that I can't discuss, but people leave the authority for all sorts of different reasons, some of them intensely personal ones, which you made a mockery of by putting that post out. So you should be embarrassed about what you've just said, and I'm quite happy to stand up here and call you out every time you say things like this, and I'll do it time and time and time again, because you will not get away with it.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other member? No? Then I think we'll move to the vote on the complaints procedure. All those in favour? Any against? Just one. No abstentions. So that's carried. Thank you very much. Right, item 12E, the long overdue boundary review. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I am happy to propose the recommendations as printed in the agenda from E, Roman numeral 1 to 3. In so moving, Mr. Mayor, as I did mention earlier in response to another question from Councillor Condacor, the last boundary review we had was in 1999. There has been nothing short of a sociological and technological and economic revolution since those days, and it's somewhat scary now to think that it's almost 23 years. I think there are actually some councillors who might not have even been born then. I'm trying to think about that. I certainly know that there are some people, when I'm doing job interviews, I certainly think, Christ, that I remember 1999. But the issue here, Mr. Mayor, is actually a fundamental principle about fair and free democratic representation. When we were last reviewed, we had a committee system. No one foresaw what the Blairite tinkering with the local government would do and introduce the executive system. That automatically excludes 6 or however many cabinet members you have from sitting on any scrutiny panels. Before, it would all be done through the respective committee, and anyone who was on that committee could have a say on the running of that council. Now, you can argue the whys and wherefores, rights and wrongs about the committee system versus the executive system, and there are pluses and minuses on both sides, although I don't detect a great hankering to move back to the committee system. We have changed so much since those days. If you think, we now have to be connected as councillors to our constituents in so many different ways that, and I don't profess to understand all of these social media platforms, as TikTok, Instagram, I just about get the hang of Twitter, Facebook, etc. And I'm sure there are some others which my colleagues will... well, there is the telephone, obviously, and email, but there are so many different ways that we can be contacted now. As councillors, we are more available 24/7 than ever before. We also have a wider range of issues that we have to deal with. Every single one of us who served through the COVID pandemic will have been contacted by a resident in some way, shape or form. And residents got in touch with us throughout COVID like never before, certainly in my 12 years on this authority. We also have the fact that we are interconnected more than ever before. If you just think about some of the organisations that we have to work with, we have VLEP, we have the Combined Authority, we have the NHS, we have the police, we have the County Council, we have the whichever respective department we now are responsible. I think it's Levelling Up Housing and Communities, it was local government, it was Deputy Prime Ministers before that. We have to do so much more. We still have our housing stock, which a number of authorities no longer do, and in and of itself that presents its own challenges, often some of the most vulnerable people in our society. And let's not forget, Mr. Mayor, that we do have the multi-million-pound regeneration of our towns, which requires a lot of effort, a lot of strategising and working towards, not just with officers, but also with members. It also involves having to deal with a lot more of the third sector and other bodies, like, for example, the universities that I've been corresponding with, etc. We have so many more connections than we ever did before. That puts far much more pull and time on us as councillors. Now, this isn't a woe is me. Actually, I think it is a remarkable thing, actually, that people can be so connected and on hand. But we have to be cognizant of the amount of responsibilities that we have as a local authority. In my view, and that of the majority, although I don't actually think there was any particular dissent on the working group, 34 councillors is not enough to do all the work that we have to do. If you think also about the planning committee, the amount of planning committees we have, every 3 weeks we have a planning committee to determine a number of planning applications, and the borough plan, whether you like it or loathe it, and I happen to loathe most of it, but I have to live with it for the time being, we will see an increase in planning applications which need determining. So we have put forward in these proposals a request for 38 councillors and 19 wards. If you look at the paperwork before us, we are forecasting, based on all the approved planning applications we have and that we know about, which are signed, sealed and delivered, between now and 2028, we are forecasting an extra 6,000 residents in Nuneaton and Bedworth, all of whom will need representing at this authority. But it's not just those 6,000, Mr. Mayor. Think about the wide-scale development, particularly in your neck of the woods, Mr. Mayor, where we have had over 6,000 houses built in St Nicholas and Weddington. By the time we get to 2028, if you compare us to something like 5 years ago, it's 12,000 residents. They deserve representation, and that's why we need to pass this forward to go to the next stage, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Golby.
I'll second and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor. Any member? Councillor Watkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't be supporting the number of councillors that is put forward in this, and the addition of two extra wards. I did say throughout the working group, and I've said it to other meetings, that probably would have supported 2 extra councillors and an extra ward, but in our view, 4 extra councillors, 2 extra wards is a step too far. We'll have to wait and see what the Boundary Commission say, but yeah, we won't be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Condacall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. We haven't yet had the 6,000 houses built. I think that's what's going to come. We're probably about 3,000 in Wellington St Nicholas at the moment, higher than we were a couple of years ago, and it really is telling. I mean, I've been walking around Wellington, and I've probably got another 15 miles of walking to do if I did all the leafleting for the ward. It's great that we're doing this review in some ways. It does present all the parties with some challenges, but we do need to have more councillors probably to cope with the extra housing. I'm not excessively precious over 36 or 38, but that's about the right number. And I would love to keep all my residents as people I represent, but obviously in the boundary review things will change. But we really also need to get people to register to vote, because the Boundary Commission works on how many voters are in each ward, and some wards have far too few people registered to vote. You see the cars outside houses and there's no one registered to vote. And all our funding and everything else quite often is based upon how big our population is and how it's growing. So I do encourage people to register to vote as well, and I don't feel strongly enough to actually vote against your proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member? Right. Just for clarity for anyone watching the live stream or at home, currently 17 wards, 34 members because it's 2 members per ward, and the proposal is to increase that due to the size of the growth in the borough to 38 councillors. So, and 19 wards. So, if there are no more speakers, then we will, yeah, Councillor Wilson will come back to you for the right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's telling that actually we're dealing with the fallout of all the building that we've had across the borough and are likely to have across the borough from the Labour Party, and it's his Labour Party who aren't actually willing to pick up after their own mess and support the recommendations which actually deal with their legacy, yet again, as my colleague Councillor Smith alluded to earlier. If you look at our SIP for nearest neighbours, and these aren't our nearest neighbours geographically, these are our neighbours financially, socially, economically most like us, they actually have far more councillors than we currently do. If you look at 3/4 of them, they have around 38 to 39 councillors. Obviously, it depends because of their electoral cycle, how many you can have, etc. But we need to have sufficient numbers to do all the work of this authority. And it is also telling that actually we need to have a hand that we can play with the Boundary Commission. And you can tell that the opposition aren't very good at negotiating. We ended up with the borough plan numbers. But again, they have a failure of negotiation skills on this front. Because if we go in and say we are happy at 34, we won't get any extra. If we say we only want 36, there is a danger, again, we will just get 34. We could say that we want 38, and I do feel genuinely that 38 is about the right number, but it might mean we actually get the 36 that we definitely need. There is no contesting that there has been an increase in the number of residents of this borough. We do need an increase in councillors to actually deal with the workload that goes with it. So perhaps some people ought to remember that this is a submission only and that we have to play the hand that we are dealt with that body. And I will be perfectly happy with 36 councillors. I think 38 is better because it actually gives better representation. But let's make the argument. The papers quite clearly outline everything in here that we have to do as a council. I think the evidence is substantial for an increase, whether that be 36 or 38. But let's put in 38 and see what they actually give us. They are the ultimate arbiter. They are the judge, jury and executioner on this one, Mr. Mayor. But we must put the foremost democratic representation of our residents. And I feel that this submission gives us the best opportunity to do that.
Thank you very much, Councillor. It's worth noting that in many years gone by, this council did have rather more council members, perhaps 45. Yeah. So, right. If we can move to the vote, then please, all those in favour and against, one. Any abstentions? 2. So that's carried. Thank you very much. So we move on to item 12F, Building a Better Borough. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am happy to move the Building a Better Borough, which is a refresh of the corporate plan of this authority. I think that this corporate plan has been the most scrutinised and most consulted corporate plan that this authority has had. Certainly in my experience on this authority, we have been out there and consulted with the residents, and I would like to pay particular tribute to Councillor Brown, who unwittingly ended up chairing a joint overview and scrutiny meeting where myself and Tom Shardlow, who is the relevant director responsible, actually sat here for about 2 hours, I think, and we were questioned on the actual development of the Building a Better Borough, or BAB as it is affectionately known by the officers. And this is a far more cogent plan and strategy for where we want our borough to be. It clearly says what we want the corporate plan to do. which is to build a better borough, not delivering our future. How Orwellian is that, delivering our future? We actually want to make improvements to the lives of our communities. We want this place, Nuneaton, Bedworth and Bulkington, to be the place that people want to live, they want to work and they want to visit. We want to ensure that people want to stay in Nuneaton and Bedworth. This is a community, this is their homes, but they also need a job, they need facilities to go out and play in the park, take their kids for a walk, take the dog for a run, and also deal with some of the very real and meaningful issues facing our community, not least of which is going to be the challenges of the COVID recovery. And I think we have a action plan or delivery plan, which I know that there are different interpretations of which one is best, but whatever plan we have, we need to ensure that it is the residents who benefit. This isn't purely a box-ticking exercise. This is a statement of intent from this new Conservative administration that we are behind you as residents. We back you. We want to improve your lives, and we want to use every opportunity that this council has to do that. Make us the place you want to live, work and visit. And I am sure that in time, we will see improvements. We've already seen a multitude of things that we've done since we took control, which are making improvements to the lives and the businesses and the shoppers and the market traders of Nuneaton and Bedworth, and we will continue to do so. So I am more than delighted to move this, Mr Mayor, and I hope it will get widespread support across the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And a seconder, Councillor Golby.
I'll second and reserve my right to speak, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Any member? Councillor Condacall.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's really good having this framework and a plan. It's really good having measures as well, because then we can see what's going well and what's not going well. So, yeah, I always get moaned at for not saying the positives, but it's your job to say the positives. But, yeah, it is positive. We've got a plan and we've got measures. But there's a few things in here that I need to just question or raise. Probably one of the more relevant ones is actually on page 181, which says, establish a long-term plan for the Bedworth Civic Hall. That is for 2025. Clearly, we should be establishing the plan now. Yeah, we should be establishing the plan why we've got this year to actually have it as a vaccination centre. A few other things in here I need to bring up. Reducing the private sector hazards. We're actually not doing that because we haven't got the staff. So we're actually going backwards on some of these measures. So I think that needs some remedial action. And then air pollution, a really important topic. And all we're doing by 2025 is meeting the legal limit we should have met 10 years ago. We really don't do anything if all our plan says it by 2025 we'll meet the legal limits for 2020, 2010, whatever. We need to be getting to World Health Authority recommended limits. We need to be reducing air pollution. We probably are still losing quite a few people each year due to poor air quality impacting their other health problems. We really need an action plan to bring down air pollution, particularly in the areas that are heavily trafficked, the ones in Nuneaton and the ones in Bedworth. And we currently aren't meeting the legal limit of 40 milligrams per cubic metre of NO2. And on your report, on page 198, it doesn't even say NO2. It just says, ensure we not exceed 40 micrograms per metre cubed in any receptor of the borough. It doesn't even say NO2. We have NO2 problems, nitrogen dioxide. We have particulates we don't even measure. Lots of things that need sorting out. And air pollution is a thing we've failed on and failed on and failed on. Not just in this administration, obviously, because you've only been in a year, but in the many years of this council. It's always been, oh, it'll get better because we'll have better cars. We'll get better, it'll get better. We'll do nothing, it'll get better. And places like the Midland Road have had basically the same appalling air pollution for the last 20 years. So I really hope if there's one thing we can actually push is actually solving the air pollution problems. Thank you, Chair.
Any other member? And Councillor Evans.
Just one little point. Obviously, this has my absolute full support. Again, Councillor Condaka, is all talk, but no action. It's great to make these points, perfectly valid points, I agree. But what are your solutions? You're not amending this report. You're not saying this is what you've got to do year by year. You're just making random comments. So, and this is why I encourage people in Weddington to really consider how they vote in a few weeks' time, because, quite frankly, people are sick and tired of politicians who are all talk and no action. Get off the fence and start giving real solutions to your problems.
Councillor Wilson, Golby, do either of you want to? Councillor Golby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to stand in saying that I do want to support this. There's been a lot of work going into this. Again, it's one of the pieces of work that was kicked off as a new administration. We wanted to make sure that the direction of travel was clear to everybody. And I think this document actually helps with that. I think the expectation that there's going to be a speedboat level of turning round rather than the reality of an oil tanker turning round is lost on some people. And I do think that we are trying our best. And we've gone through an awful lot of stuff in the background of this that doesn't show through in this report necessarily, but there has been a lot of work going on. So there are headlines in here that have got stuff going on in the background that aren't necessarily obvious at the moment. But again, I agree with Councillor Evans, is we get a lot of complaints, but we don't get any resolution or any kind of reasonable offers that are alternative. When we were in opposition, part of our remit was that we would provide useful opposition. So we would put plans forward, and part of those plans are actually borne out in this document. We're not seeing that. Again, it's just moaning, just, carping from the sidelines, as it was pointed out earlier on. We're all ears to reasonable suggestions, and you might not want to put everything in an E-Petition because you'll be complaining about how much officer time that takes up to resolve, to filter through all the E-Petitions. You might just want to actually deal with people on a human level, but I'm not sure that you're capable of that because of Tories. It's not a personal insult. It's fact from where I'm sitting.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I think I have the final right of reply. It's interesting to actually hear the Labour councillors and candidates in the gallery chuntering away because their colleagues actually have no solutions to the problems that this borough actually faces, and that's why almost 12 months ago they lost office, and why this month again they will stay out of power, and quite rightfully so. To address some of the points raised about the Civic Hall, to start off with, I don't know how many more times I can say this. Perhaps I actually have to learn Mandarin to get this point across. But we have been given 1 year by the NHS, serendipity really. They have asked for the Civic Hall to continue the vaccination programme, quite rightfully so. And officers are under no illusion from me that we need to use these 12 months to actually come up with a significant and sustainable plan for the Civic Hall. Labour's answer was just to keep chucking hundreds of thousands of pounds at it every single year, to the tune of £800,000 every single year. Imagine what we could do with that as an authority on all the other things that we want to do, about regeneration, about housing, about our play and open spaces. But we can't, because the Civic Hall is a money pit to this authority. For every single person that walks into the Civic Hall when it was open as an entertainment venue, if they bought a lemonade, it cost us £25 as an authority for that use. Every time someone went to go and see a show, which was more often than not at less than 50% capacity, it cost us £25 a head for that person to walk in. Let me ask any other member of the public, if you had a business Would you keep it open on its current business plan if it cost you £25 for every person that walked through your doors? You would be bankrupt, Mr. Mayor. As a local authority, we do not have the option of going bankrupt. We legally have to set a balanced and sustainable budget, which is why it is this authority who are taking the hard decisions about what we do to make that Civic Hall financially viable. And there will always be an entertainment venue in Bedworth, and that is what we have said. We just need to make it more financially sound for the future. That Civic Hall needs £1 million spending on it before we can even open it up as a theatre or music establishment again. We can't even put a play on because you can't put the scenery in to change it. So if you want to go to see a play, you have to go to the Hinckley Concordia or you have to go to the Belgrade. We don't have that option here. Or you can go to the Abbey Theatre, but that itself has its own constraints. And let us look at air pollution. One of the big driving factors of air pollution we will have is the impacts of the borough plan and the housing and where that goes. Now, we were supposed to have reviewed, according to the government inspector, and I will challenge Mr. Walmsley in the gallery, it was not a Conservative government inspector, it was an independent inspector. That is like saying the judge who tries you at the Crown Court is a politician. They are not, they are independent. And it was that independent inspector who said that we must review our plan by 2023 at the latest. What did Labour do? Nothing. They waited until we took office and we are dealing with their mess yet again. And because we have to do so much work, which they could and should have done in their time in office, we have to spend another £250,000 just to get all those, I think it's 14 or 15 reports, to make it a sound and sustainable plan. Where was the Green answer at the budget? There was none. Where was Labour's answer at the budget? There was none. It's us who are dealing with your mess. And it is you who try to deflect it onto this authority and the government. The government didn't force us to take 4,000 houses. It was you and your controlling party who at the time said take the 4,000 houses. You couldn't even be bothered to turn up to the meetings and you couldn't negotiate your way out of a paper bag, never mind an agreement with 5 other local authorities. So yet again, we are picking up the pieces and it shows why the other parties are completely unelectable in Nuneaton and Bedworth. We're the ones who are providing the serious answers to the challenges facing Nuneaton and Bedworth in 2022 and beyond. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Right, I think in that case, everybody has spoken that's indicated, so we will move to the vote. All those in favour? Against? 2, no abstentions. That's carried. And I'd like to thank you all. That concludes tonight's business. Yep. Just checking there's nothing else. Please all have a safe journey home. And the next time that we meet will be in May for the annual council and mayor making, when somebody else will take over this chair. Thank you all.